All right, Mike, how's it going this Friday?
It's going great. How are you, Dan?
I am doing pretty good. Another busy week. I think last week I said that I was the good kind of tired, and I think that's true again this week.
I don't know where the time goes. Like, I know stuff is getting done. Like, I'm getting stuff done. But like, when I fill out my stand-ups, I'm like, is that really all I did yesterday? It feels like I did more.
Right, right. Yeah, well, you've had a bunch of things in like different domains going on, I feel like, which can really cause, like context switching and just it can also be kind of hard to quantify, I feel like.
I also get distracted by shiny things. So, we had that big announcement about the cross-platform SDK going to general availability for Zephyr support. And one of the things that we found out when we were about to release is that Twister, which is the testing framework in Zephyr, doesn't support sysbuild for prepping artifacts. So it's like a lot of like code words. But basically, this automation tool that runs in CI and runs tests on our actual devices will compile everything on the cloud and then download them to run them on the devices. And there's a prep artifacts flag that makes sure that it's only the binaries and not like the entire build directory. And that's fine if you're just building a simple application. But if you're building a multi-domain application, like one that has MCU boot and an application in it, then that tool doesn't know how to find those files. And so we've been downloading like 300 megabyte artifact packets when we only
Mm.
need like 300 kilobytes of binary in them, or some round numbers like that. So I had looked at it initially and I couldn't find, in just a few minutes, I couldn't find where that decision on what files to keep was being made. But then, of course, that's been itching my brain ever since I couldn't find that. I'm like,
Right.
wonder where that is. So, like Wednesday night or something, I was like, all right, my wife's at work, my kid's asleep. I don't have anything planned to watch. I don't, like, I'm gonna go look for that thing just to find it, and then
Yeah.
like 2 hours later, I'm like, I fixed it, woo! But now I'm in the doldrums of writing unit tests for it,
Ah.
because that tool has some pretty intense unit testing. And so that may end up taking me longer than the fix did.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome though, and obviously, like, anytime we can contribute upstream, other folks will benefit as well. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I think maybe I told you before or someone else, like, I just want to have contributions in open source projects. Like that just feels very like a very cool way to spend your time. So I'm
Right.
happy to do that when I can.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, in past jobs, I've worked like full time on a open source project before, which was really fun. Because like that's just all you do all day, every day. Um, the I feel like when I'm not doing that, so when my role is only like some open source or maybe no open source, I always find myself like wanting to be really, or I guess missing being really like deeply involved in a community. Well, because it is fun to make like drive-by contributions, but there is something like really cool about when you have like multiple companies, maybe some individuals that are doing things on like a recurring basis and essentially doing, engineering process across companies. That's something I feel like I really miss, and it's hard to find time to do that sometimes if it's not your part of your day job.
Dan's got maintainer tattooed on his heart. It's incredible, like the scope of some of these large open source projects. Like Zephyr RTOS it's not one of the biggest, but it's getting pretty big. And to watch like the volume of issues and pull requests and reviews and conversations and it's like it feels pretty organized. Like it's impressive.
Yeah, yeah, I think they do a really good job. The biggest project I've had experience contributing to or maintaining, and there's lots of different roles in the community, but in Kubernetes, it's like, a PR opened like every minute or something like that, and that's probably not that frequently, but it is, on the order of like a couple minutes or so. And like you have to have good process there, or else it'll just become, you know, untenable to manage an ecosystem that large. So, um, but there's a lot of fun in it and getting to meet so many people for sure.
Well, and on this topic of like being part of communities, like you have some news this week.
Oh, the Risk 5? Is that what you're
Yeah.
oh, yeah, yeah. So, I am officially a Risk 5 ambassador, which I've been, I guess I call myself a fan probably of Risk 5. Um, and done a lot of like writing and some contributing to various software in the space as well. But they've always had this requirement that you work for a member company in order to be an ambassador, which like there's reasons. And, the RISC-V Foundation is part of the Linux Foundation, which is Zephyr and Kubernetes are also in as well. So, like, they're dealing with a lot of hierarchy and policies and things like that. So I get it. But it was really cool to get to be in that program. They sent me some fun swag. So, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I mean, I'm mostly planning on continuing to do what I've
Right.
been doing, but it's nice to, I don't know, have like a more formal association. I always feel like when I'm writing, like when we submit talks to conferences and you're writing like your bio, I always like feel like I want to include my Risk 5 involvement in that, which sometimes I have said something like, active contributor, participant, and or something like that. But it doesn't really sound like it's kind of hard to like describe what you do. It's like, I don't know, I just kind of hang around and help out. Um,
Willing to explain how RISC-V bytecode works, stuff
yeah,
like
right,
that.
right, exactly. So yeah, no, it was definitely cool and appreciated. And there's a lot of other folks in the program who um, I've interacted with before in the past. So it's cool to reconnect with some of them as well.
Yeah, well, you deserve it, man. If someone was gonna ask me what should a RISC-V ambassador look like, I'd be like this guy.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I'm just uh, from like a I guess technical perspective, uh, there's trade-offs with like everything. So I'm not I wouldn't call myself a fanatic in that like, it's absolutely better than all other instruction sets and all other, um, ecosystems around instruction sets. But I definitely one thing that I think is fundamentally unique and that I can kind of like always say like, yes, I believe in this and think it's very good, and others do not have this, is just the openness around it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've definitely gained a lot just like trying to learn more about hardware, about open specifications have been really helpful, but also implementations, which is what you're missing from most other instruction sets.
Well, and I think, anything that pushes open source closer to the silicon is probably a good thing over the long run.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is interesting to see like how how there's more open source silicon, but also how that's like impacting the ability for more people to produce to tape things out. So like obviously I think we've talked about in here tiny tape out, which the new submission window just opened for everyone. I think it's tiny tape out
Ooh.
6, or maybe I think it's 6. So like that kind of stuff is really cool, but also I think costs of lower process nodes like tiny tape out uses uh, are just it's becoming more feasible. So
Mhm.
hopefully all those things are like coalescing into uh, more free and open source things.
Have you had the chance to like put a RISC-V core on an FPGA and play around with them that way?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've written a like a small one in Verilog that's just RV32i, so just like the base integer instruction set, which is very very minimal. But it is really cool when you like write the RTL and then you write some machine code, or I mean you could compile something to target
Right.
RV32i if you want to as well. And like it executes the like you're like, oh, this is real. Yeah, exactly. I think that is kind of like a magic moment for sure. um but yeah, I feel like yeah, it's a really fun space. And um so I hope that it continues to become more and more accessible.
It's so funny because I think about a breakthrough like that, and I think about it in this room with no one else, and then I like run out and tell Amanda all about it, and she's like, "Oh,
Yeah,
yeah."
right. That's a that reminds me tonight. Have you ever been to a PowerPoint party?
Never.
Okay. So this is like one of my favorite things. I don't get out a ton. But there's like a very small subset of things that will inspire me to leave the house. But one of like the only, I guess, like social things besides like meetups and things like that that I also sometimes go to are these like PowerPoint parties, which we have. Most of our friends in this area are like fairly nerdy because a lot of them have we've met through Katie's grad program. But PowerPoint parties are basically like you just prepare a presentation like
Uh-huh.
you're going to present at a conference or for a class or something like that, but you're just preparing it for your friends. And you try to do something that like maybe is like unique to you, some experience you have. So it could be like hobbies, could be something with your job if you do something that's pretty different from everyone else. Really, I guess just anything. But then you just go and like present and you learn stuff and you learn more about what your friends care about and are really like will really geek out about. And I love it so much. I think it's like the ideal social uh like activity. So
Yeah, man, I actually
yeah.
have done something like that, but a
Oh,
little bit
cool.
more formalized. So, like, my
Uh-huh.
friend Bob invited me to a nerd night. I don't know if you've
Ooh,
ever heard of nerd night
I haven't.
before, but he was giving it's a similar like they hold it. It's organized like a meetup, but it's like at a bar, like almost like open mic, except they line up people
Ooh.
to do talks, and you do a slide, and it's like so he went to like Target and got a clearance like some remote control car. He's a electronic engineer and product engineer, and he took apart the packaging and the car and all its constituent components, and then traced out where all of the materials for those components would come from, like where they would be mined, where they'd be refined, where they'd be turned into packages, where those packages would be sent to be manufactured, where that would be sent to be assembled, where that would be uh, boxed up, how it would go on a container ship, and all this stuff all the way till it gets to the target in his neighborhood. And it was just a really cool
Interesting.
talk. And there were like 3 other talks, totally unrelated to stuff, but equally deep dives into cool stuff that you're just never going to hear outside of an event like this.
Yeah. Wow, that is really cool. I mean, is this a like a meetup style thing where they're like all over the place? They have these.
Yeah, they have a find our cities button. I've only been to the one since my orchestra job is often at night. I almost am never available for something like this, but I don't know. They got like 20, 30 cities maybe in the US, it looks like, and also in Europe. And where's that? Argentina? Chile. Santiago, Chile's got one. If you're watching from Chile.
Hey, there's one in
Uh,
Raleigh.
there you go.
Wow. I might have to check this out. That's really cool.
Now you're going to be going out twice as much.
Yeah, right. Did you give a presentation at one or you just attended one?
I just attended one. It'd
Okay.
be fun to give a presentation. I wonder what I would talk about. I mean, probably like the music stuff. Like there's just a lot of really interesting stuff. Like use my wife as an example. She's a bassoon player, and bassoons and oboes make their own reeds like at home. Like they start
Oh,
with
wow.
raw cane that's been dried out, but like a third of a round thing of cane, and over a multi-month process, like turn it into something you can play on a bassoon. It's crazy. And there's all these special tools for it, like a profiler is like this precision machine instrument that shaves it down like just right, and she's got a micrometer she's measuring it with and whittling and sanding and all this stuff. And if you think
Wow.
about like every profession has some niche things like that, and if everyone's giving a talk once a month at this thing about that stuff, like you can get a window into all kinds of places.
Yeah, that's really cool. That is really cool. One of the things that's I feel like kind of a nice thing about working on computers, whether it's like hardware or software, is that everyone interacts with them. And so like what you're talking about may not be something they need to understand, but like it's really easy. Well, I wouldn't say it's easy. I guess there is a clear line between like talking about something like really technical and nerdy about computers, and then like drawing it to someone's experience because like everyone has used a computer before, they have an iPhone or whatever. Um, so, and I don't know many other software engineers or hardware or any people in that domain really around here. So I usually go for something that's like right in my wheelhouse. So I've done a Risk 5 presentation before. I've done just like a history of computing. Um, Tonight, I am planning to talk about how computers do floating point arithmetic. So
Ooh,
should be a
interesting.
fun one. Yeah.
How do they do floating point arithmetic?
Well, they it's
They turn
actually
on the
only
FPU, and
right,
then out the other side pops your number.
right, exactly. That's it. That's what I mean. It is only we only have 3 minutes for our presentation tonight.
What?
So
Oh, so it's like half of a lightning talk is what I'd consider that to
yeah,
be.
yeah. I'd say like 5 minutes around there is like a lightning talk. Yeah,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
it's a quick one. So I've been struggling with how to condense it down because like if you I'm starting at like humans use base 10, computers use base 2 kind of and building from there.
Mhm.
But like you don't have a lot of time to build in 3 minutes. So it's kind of like a this is how it works like accept it. Now we're moving on, you know? So
It's like the hold your eyes open and then like play rapid slides in front of them,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
just absorb the information.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely like lean towards there's definitely pros and cons to this, but my presentation style is very much like heavy content and like my philosophy is I'm going to give you as much as possible because you can always go and like look into things in more detail. So I'm not going to uh like compress things down because I don't know what you care about and what you don't. So I'm just going to include lots of stuff which can have, can also lead to rambling presentations or just like people will get, exhausted by like the pace you're moving at and that sort of thing. So it's definitely a balance, but we're gonna we're gonna try to do that in 3 minutes tonight. So we'll see.
Oh, super fun.
Yeah, should be fun. Well, more to Goliath things, although almost everything I feel like somehow can tie back to Goliath. But you're doing a webinar for us coming up here.
Yeah, absolutely. Webinar Goliath 101 on, I'm going to say Wednesday. I don't know. What is
Sometime next
time?
week.
Time's a construct. Let's see. It is, uh, hold on. I'm sure it's on my calendar. There we go. 11 a.m. Central Time on Thursday, the 15th of February.
All right.
And so that is like, it's kind of like a demo of Goliath, but it's more like come along with me as I sign up for the Goliath console and set up a device and run some services on that and show you like what to expect from each service. So if you're like, oh, okay, I have these types of data, I have these types of needs, how does that kind of match up with what Goliath is offering? I hope to cover that so that it reduces the number of questions and boosts your understanding of Goliath. And it is something you can participate, be in the room on, the virtual room on, and ask questions. So the presentation will only be a portion of it, and we'll kind of guide it on what people are asking along the way.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool. I feel like that's a nice alternative to like the training and things like that because it is a little more like passive where you may not have like the barrier to entry, not in terms of like ability, but in terms of like commitment, I guess is a little lower. So that sounds really cool. I'm really excited for folks to have that as a resource.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to gauge on whether or not we kind of even look at code based on like who's there. So like I don't think there's a requirement to know code. It's more like can you understand the way that Goliath is going to look when data is flowing from devices, and then kind of also how to manage that growing fleet of devices and how we kind of facilitate that. So I'm excited about it. New thing, and certainly hope that people go and sign up, which they can do at
For the webinar or for the
yeah,
console?
yeah. No, for the
Uh,
webinar. I don't know if we have a
let's
we're gonna
see.
stay tuned. We're gonna put up a link when we find that.
Actually, follow us on all socials just so that you'll see it when we.
Yeah, right.
I did see the post recently on multiple platforms.
All right, I got it. I
Oh,
got it.
nice.
Webinar sign-in page. Oh, it's got a countdown on it.
Ooh,
It's a
that's fun.
countdown to me delivering on having a slide deck done. 5 days, 21 hours, 40 minutes, and 11 seconds. This
Nice.
is the link. I don't know. I should keep reading. Maybe there's a short link to it.
Yeah, I wonder if on I was gonna look at our social post a lot of. Oh, here we go.
You got a
Got
short
it.
one?
Wow. This is a very fancy short link. I mean, it's just a short link, but Goliath. glth.io/Goliath101.
Yeah. I
I was
gotta see if
actually
there's the. I wonder if the training sign up works for that. Have you tried that one?
no, just glthio/training.
Well, it's. I think it was like training dash sign up. Nope, page not found. We should request that one. So also coming up in a week from Wednesday. So next Thursday, join us for the Goliath 101. And then if you want to do a kind of quick start for getting boot camp with Zephyr, maybe you want to say, with Goliath engineers, you should come to the Goliath training, which that one is training sign up and just at Goliath.io. So let me put that one up too. Too
And
many
this will
windows
be the
down.
first training with the. Are you using the cross-platform SDK in training, or have we been using that?
Maybe there's
Okay.
a conflict with the Wi-Fi supplicant
Gotcha.
library that Nordic uses, and so we think we got that worked out. But I tried it this morning and it still wasn't working. So there's probably just one thing, and we've got like what 10 days before that training. So I think we can get it worked out.
Yeah, for sure.
I've done the port for or I've done the migration,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to make sure that all the boards that people are using work. I think from a standpoint of people that are attending, though, it doesn't really make a difference whether we're up to the new one or not, because we are mainly looking at code for Zephyr itself and not code for Goliath. We do Goliath testing of like precompiled binaries. And so looking at that sample code would still be like the old APIs, but the behavior will be the same.
Gotcha. That's cool. Yeah, the training continues to improve and evolve over time. Because last time we were talking about that, it was the first time that code spaces were being used.
That was
So
great. Yeah.
yeah, it seemed like
We're
that went
also
off without a
like,
hitch.
yeah, and I think we're also stabilizing on like early on we had some connectivity problems that we're kind of like figuring out. Like Wi-Fi access points, everyone has a million different ways of doing it. And so I think working through the common issues like, oh, I have weird punctuation in my SSID or in my PSK, or I have like spaces and apostrophes in my SSID, like Dan's iPhone is like the iPhone thing. And then
Yeah,
like you got to be like, oh, do I need to escape that or just wrap it in quotes? Or like, what's the deal? So
yeah.
that's
We
always
should
fun.
make a little like just like a static page app with JavaScript that is like a converter. You just paste
Oh
in
yeah.
whatever your
I
SSID is.
I think as we evolved, we just settled on wrapping it in double quotes and it's fine.
Huh. Yeah, I guess that should
But
work, right?
yeah. But there's, there sometimes there are like security issues. So the WPA version needs to be explicitly set at compile time with the Nordic examples for this board. So like if you have a WPA 3 or like a WPA enterprise a access point, like we need to recompile for that.
Mm, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm sure there's a way to do it. I haven't looked into it. I'm betting that like the kconfig symbols that choose that are just building in the different functionality, and then there's probably a configuration struct that you pass that to. But it would be nice, in my free time sometime to write like a something that would go and like try and figure out what the authentication format is, and then
Yeah,
connect to the AP. But yeah, who's
yeah,
got time?
that's so true. Yeah,
Although my team
awesome.
told me that there's in-flight support from Nordic for that board. We use that 7002 board to get it into the Wi-Fi abstraction of Zephyr,
Oh,
and I
nice.
think that's good because then it kind of like centralizes all problems into one space.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, that would be really helpful. Uh, well, there was a topic that I had put at least in the description, which we know from last week. We definitely can talk about other things than the description. But I want to talk a little bit about documentation. And the reason why I was thinking about this is we already talked about this a couple weeks ago when you had done a bunch of the work. to kind of like move our documentation to a new structure. And maybe, let me see, I'll pull up the docs here and we can kind of have them up while we talk through it. But I was thinking about kind of two, hold on one second. I was thinking about kind of two different strategies for organizing documentation. And I feel like we used to be one and then we moved to another one, right? And I was thinking about, I was definitely a big advocate for our new model here. And I think, pretty generally across the company, there was support for moving to the new model. And maybe I'll just go ahead and define them. Like the first one is more like role based. So you're trying to provide different journeys for different personas who might come to your documentation. So for us, we kind of broadly had like firmware engineers and cloud engineers. And then another one is there's more than just these two. There's also like, product based, which ours is kind of like that. But I'd say ours is more like task based in terms of like, what are you trying to accomplish here? Are you trying to like write your firmware? Okay, go to the firmware section. Are you trying to manage your devices? Go to device management. Are you trying to route your data? Go to data routing, etc. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like one product always fits under one of those categories. We're trying to think about like user experiences or product experiences that we're offering, right? We have a bunch of products that may work together to make up device management. Some of those products may also contribute to our data routing or contribute to our firmware. And so I feel like we've kind of moved to this like experience journey rather than like role-based kind of strategy. And I was looking through our docs because I was actually trying to remember how to do something this week with our platform. And I was thinking to myself, oh, I like this a lot better, but is this like strictly better? And I don't think it is. I don't think it's strictly better than like, I don't think one strategy is strictly better than the other. But I was curious about, okay, if it's not strictly better in all cases, what are the attributes of a company or a product or maybe an open source project that make one of these models more applicable to it? And I do have some ideas, but I just kind of want to like pose that as a question to you because you've done the most work on our documentation and really drive a lot of it. And so I'm curious like how you think about that and maybe if you feel like you have an answer or thoughts about that question.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge for us because we have kind of like two products, even though our product is the cloud platform that makes connecting microcontrollers very easy. But we also provide that device SDK so that, the thousands of devices that you're going to be putting in the field, you don't have to like roll your own from scratch firmware and thereby introduce a whole bunch of bugs that you didn't know were there and that sort of thing. So like having a situation where you have to service both of those makes it, I think, off the bat a little bit difficult to organize. But then also there's like a changing role as you first hear about the company and then as you decide to use the product and then as you are using the product changes. So for instance, like I need to figure out what Golioth is and if it fulfills my needs. So I think you need like a swim lane where you like start here and go through this process and it should answer all your questions as you go. And then the I don't know what I don't know, I think is more like what you're doing right now is like looking at the stuff along the top, like which one of these things has the thing that I need. And then I think as you kind of are comfortable with it, you're like, okay, it has the things I need. I spec'd it out. It's a legit platform. I'm going to use it. Now I'm going to start doing my work. Then I think it becomes like a search-based document thing where you're like doing reference documents. And so you may be searching for something to find out what sections it's in, and then you might bookmark that section and go to it. But I'm with you in the same way that it is like, what experience am I going through right now? Okay, I'm writing firmware. Well, let me go to the firmware and see how this stuff writes. And then what experience am I doing now? Well, I've got devices and I need to figure out how to interact with those devices. That's probably under device management. I do think this is quantifiably better than what we had before the change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I like that you called out kind of these maybe we might say like bookend sections of getting started and reference, which are pretty different than firmware, device management, and data routing. Because it's like kind of giving this acknowledgement of like how are you expected to be able to go to one of these if you don't even like have an introduction to what the platform are, right? We're using these words. What do these words might mean something to you, but they might mean something different to us. So we had to like do that definition. So I think that getting started section is really important. And then of course, as you mentioned, like the reference is more just like, I know how the platform works. I know how to route data through it. I need the actual like specific API call. Like, please don't, throw a paragraph at me. Give me just like the answer. So I think both those are critical as well. One of the things I feel like maybe makes this quantifiably better for us is that we just have such a diversity of consumers of the platform in terms of like the types of company and types of people at those companies, that it's really hard to have like just a firmware and a cloud section, let's say, and accommodate people who are firmware engineers who don't know anything about the cloud, people who are cloud engineers that don't know anything about firmware, and then the people who are able to do both, right? And I think a lot of
Mhm.
times, especially in that first like introduction to Goliath, the person who's coming in and is interested and maybe is like someone who becomes a champion for Goliath in an organization is someone who kind of understands all of it. And so it feels like to me in that case that if we're really separating based on roles, that we're actually kind of doing that person a disservice, right? Because we don't like have a connective experience about like I'm understanding like the philosophy of the platform. Maybe we're like forcing you to like get in the firmware mode and then get in the cloud mode. It's like, well, what if I'm like designing the firmware because I'm thinking through all the way to, that getting delivered to my cloud provider or my on-prem location or something like that. And I feel like this setup is very much like more accommodates that a lot better. So I feel like that's one of the things about our product that may not be true about every product that makes a difference maybe in how we do our documentation.
Yeah,
The
and I think if you unfold that bottom link on the left sidebar there,
Mhm.
it's like going through this getting started thing is like figuring out what the platform is, and then, okay, I wanna try out the platform. So we have the ability right now, there's one device under that running precompiled binaries, which is the Thingy 91, which is a nice little platform, but it's probably not what you're gonna end up putting in the field, and you might not just have it on your desk right now. But there's a bunch of other, um devices that you probably do have one of them kicking around. And so our plan longer term is to have like a code spaces option where you can, well, have some more precompiled binaries where you can uh, just download them, run them on the device, and try out the platform. But then also, we had a really cool demo from Marcin this morning that I think we should talk about when we're done with our docs segment. But the thought of having a code spaces for the device SDK itself, so you could immediately, like in a browser tab, open up VS Code and start playing around with one of those samples that you already ran and recompile it and then run it on the device. Like, I think there's this kind of like on ramp to all of these different topics. And if you're just trying to validate that Goliath does what you need it to do, you might want to make, 10 lines of code change in order to do a demo at your own company. And if we can facilitate that in this first swim lane, I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that being able to pop open a code space is a pretty incredible experience there. I feel like I feel like even just being able to change something to like the message saying your company name rather than like, whatever example, uh, just makes it more real. So even that kind of thing could be really useful. And I know we've also talked about, potentially using things like WebAssembly and whatnot to be able to allow folks to write like small pieces of functionality that, get slotted into the system so that they really have like really low overhead about writing custom logic, but they're still able to kind of like demonstrate, certain functionality, exercise certain functionality, which would be really cool.
But then
Um,
we get into Sam's territory, which is the firmware tab. And Sam is firmly of the opinion that like people coming to the firmware tab know what they're doing,
yeah,
and you don't need to spoon feed it. You need to give them the information that they want in the way that they want it now. And so I think you're right. I think we are servicing a bunch of different roles here, and that's great.
yeah. I think especially on the firmware side, like I don't know exactly how to phrase. I feel like that like firmware is like serious is how I would describe it in terms of like not that it's really like I mean a lot of times actually firmware is you know, the code for firmware is actually pretty heinous, but like the I
So
feel
is the
like, you
cloud
know,
engineer.
right. Well, I mean, like good firmware code is or maybe just good embedded code is usually very impressive, right? And there's lots of thought
Yeah.
about low level details. But there's a lot of people who write, I think, embedded code that don't have that background or familiarity, and a lot of times that can get a little messy. But I do feel like there is like a certain there's like a balance of making things like really easy and also like demonstrating sophisticated functionality, right? It's like this is if you really want to be able to like turn all the knobs, which a lot of times you do when you're, you know, writing firmware because you're already operating at that lower level. If we make it like too abstract or I don't feel like abstract is the right word, but like along those lines, then I think there can be somewhat of a sense of like this doesn't give me all of the knobs I need to turn. Um,
Right.
so
Mhm.
I think that's kind of an interesting side. Whereas, like, I mean, you know, if you compare it to the cloud side, you're not writing code on the cloud side, right? You're calling APIs and you control the code, right? We're not giving you an SDK today to interact with it. And so there's just like kind of a different, uh, I guess, like communication model where like people are probably a lot more protective slash opinionated about the code that they write rather than just, you know, calling a REST API. But
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I also think that you have a lot more flexibility when you're working with the REST API because you probably have a whole server to
mm,
do things on that has a bajillion options when it comes to libraries and packages and languages and stuff like that. When you
right.
get into embedded, there's only like a handful of languages that you're probably going to use. And then we don't have a COBOL SDK yet, but
Not yet.
we have a porting guide. So
Right.
you know, anyone that
Yeah. That would be a fun one. You mentioned Marcin's demo this morning. Do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, man, absolutely. That was wild. I loved it. So he's been working with what I assume is a new development in Zephyr called Native Sim. And it is, if you're familiar with QEMU or QEMU, depending on how you say it, it is a way to run embedded firmware on like a Linux box. And and it's great for testing, but it is not user friendly. So we have a guide in the docs on how to do it, and I've done it many times, and I always have to use the guide. And every time I use it, I'm like, this is dumb. So you have to open like 3 different terminal sessions in order to like get the networking to work. And then at one point, Docker had changed my IP tables, and so the networking wouldn't work. And it took me forever to figure out that it was. In fact, Marcin had to help me figure out that it was Docker changing my IP tables, and that's why my QEMU wasn't working. But QEMU works great. You can do a ton of debugging on it. You can do testing on it. It compiles and flashes fast because you're not going across the serial cable to a device. There's just all kinds of good things about it. But that user like hurdle to get networking up and running, and I think it will not work with the Macs that have the Apple Silicon in them and some other stuff. Like it maybe only works with Linux and only some of the time because I've had problems myself. Native Sim seems to have wrapped up all those problems. So it basically is like, oh, I'm running on a box that has an internet connection. That's all I need. And it's like all happy and good. And so Martin went through and compiled all of our examples in the cross-platform SDK and showed them running and interacted with them with the cloud, and then dropped into a debugger and did step debugging with it and showed like, you know, setting breakpoints as the blocks download for over, you know, OTA, like the more complex stuff that you're going to be doing, you might need to debug. And then I liked your comment. You're like, Martin's like Steve Jobs because, you know,
Yeah.
he does all this stuff and we're applauding and everyone's like, yeah. And then he's like, oh, and one more thing. And he showed, I think the one more thing was wire sharking, wasn't it? I can't even remember. There were so
I
many.
think it might have been using GDB.
Oh, using GDB. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
The debugging is very cool. I also thought the wire sharking was very cool
Mhm.
because, you know, trying to catch the network communications on, you know, whatever device you have currently connected to your computer can be really tough. Like we've done things before where you make your laptop a Wi-Fi device and you pass through to the Ethernet port and then you can sniff the traffic that way. But like network debugging is hard, and native sim makes it super easy. I
Mhm.
also would like to say I was very jealous of the terminal-based Wireshark interface that Martine's using, because I still use the GUI, and I'm not a huge fan of GUIs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he had his setup looking really good. Yeah, for the kind of like Wireshark or sniffing packets and whatnot, I've always just because our like proxy can be nested, I always just run that on a machine and then just run Wireshark on that and then point all my devices at it and then it just proxies it up to our cloud, which is nice, but obviously like a bit more cumbersome than just like running a native binary on your machine. So um, that is super cool. The uh, the debugging was the part that I think was super useful. And obviously, like you can debug on a device as well, but just being able to run the native binary under GDB, I was just thinking about. I was working with one of our customers recently, and our customers like hit problems a lot of times in their firmware that don't have anything to do with our SDK necessarily, because there's so much configuration with firmware where you need to, based on what you're doing, right, like increase the heap size or something like that. That was actually the specific issue they were running
Mhm.
into, and sometimes the errors manifest in really just opaque ways. And one of the things I was doing is I was trying to kind of like replicate. So I obviously got like the commit hash for that's our version of the SDK he was using. I don't know, what code was surrounding our SDK and what his firmware looked like. Um, but I was kind of spelunking through trying to get to where in Zephyr I was getting an error code back, or they were getting error code back, and I didn't really want to set up a device and run it and try to like, and I couldn't, right? It ended up, well, it ended up being due to the heap size, but we thought it was due to network issues in the office that they were in,
Right. Yeah.
and so like I could have gotten to the where this error code is being returned and given advice a lot faster if I could have just like set some breakpoints really quickly and just compiled to a native
Yeah.
binary and run it. It would have taken me on the order of like a minute as opposed to like, oh, okay, I haven't set up this device in a while, right? Like, so yeah, I think it's definitely going to be super useful from even like a customer support perspective.
We should try and get Martine on the show to talk about this. We had Sam on last week. That was totally fun. I know the project, which shall not yet be named, that Tim's been doing a lot of work on. Like, it might be really fun for Tim to come on too. But like, I feel
Yeah.
like I I feel really like the lucky to be in on all these demos that we're doing internally, and we come and talk about them. But like, it's inspiring to watch people do these things, and we should share that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'm actually really excited about with some of that work Tim's been doing and some of the pieces that surround it are I think that we are going to have an opportunity, and this will probably be like a few months after we actually
Yeah,
release this, but an opportunity to actually uh in an open way, a way that we could just do on this live stream, introduce new functionality into our platform, not just, our firmware. Um, and that I think is going to be really exciting to, I know you and I talked about, I think a couple weeks ago, like having, like a timer and seeing like how fast we could implement something. And
yeah.
so I think like I'm eager, obviously, from my perspective, to get some of the cloud bits into a realm where we can play with them and do interesting stuff. I think we could also demo without necessarily bring up the code necessarily, but we could also just demo
Mhm.
some of the components running locally.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe
when you
even
were showing
SDK
adding
version.
services, that was just like YAML, right? Like
Yeah,
you were putting instructions into a YAML file, and all of a sudden, like, Goliath does new stuff. And
yeah,
like, that is gold. I love it.
yeah, yeah. That was very fun, especially because like it doesn't have to be services that we've built even. Like, I think in that one,
Yeah,
right, it was, wait, what did I show? Oh, it was, like, getting the current time or
NTP.
something like that, yeah. Um,
Yeah, which NTP is one that I use all the time as an example, because it's like that's a problem that microcontrollers have, is where am I going to get the time from when I wake up? I have no idea what year it is, you know?
right, right, exactly. Yeah, that one's really cool, and I think even just, like, similar to when we did the badge case hack and that sort of thing, how we just like stood up a little cloud function. Um, just like people writing random cloud functions for stuff and then hitting them from devices, I think would be uh, super cool. Especially one of the things we didn't show there, but communication going the other way is really interesting as well, and could be a lot of fun. So
Yeah, I mean, like this or e-paper picture frame that I have behind me that plays a movie frame every 4 minutes or something like that. I actually make the frames available through HTTP and then use IoT to get the signal that says, "Hey, there's a new frame available." But like having that available through our service, to because it is coming from outside, right? So it's coming from a server that has the movie on it that's getting the frame off of it.
right,
But just like weird use cases are, I think, a great place that we could specialize in, because every company is solving some kind of unique problem. That's why they're a company. And if we could make it so like you have a unique problem that needs solving, that's what we do. Goliath is made for
right. Yeah, absolutely.
that.
That actually made me think as well about some of the work we've been doing recently for our usage tracking, and some of what's going to be like available for folks to be able to see in the console pretty soon about being able to see like what services they're using and like how many bytes of logs they're sending up um,
Right.
each day and per project, and break that down and that sort of thing. That's another area where I think it'll be a lot of fun just to kind of like understand. I think it's going to help folks optimize a lot better too, when
Mhm.
they're thinking about, what types of payloads they're going to be sending up and how often and that sort of thing. They can try it out, obviously in a free tier, um, and get a sense for for what the real world use is, because sometimes it can be a little tedious trying to just uh, you know guesstimate
Count.
about how often you're going to be sending and that sort of thing. So um, yeah, I think that'll be a big help as well. Well, I am just about ready for the weekend. I'm not signing off after this, but I am going to work on something that is interesting that I was chatting with Sam about last week. Um,
Ooh, secret
so
project.
yeah, it's not really that interesting. It's just sending proto buff messages
Oh yeah,
over their
nice.
app. So yeah, but
Well, I got a couple more hours, and I'm gonna try and get that 7002 working so we can get that code switched over for training, because I'm excited about that. So that's
yeah,
my Friday.
awesome, awesome. Well, that sounds good. Well, Mike, thanks again for joining me this week. Great chat, lots of different topics again, and hope you have a great weekend.
You too, Dan. Great to see you.
Awesome.
Bye.
See you, folks.